Welcome to the Daily Plunge. We are in the book of Genesis, chapter 41, verses 1 through 40. When full years had passed, it starts off by saying 2 years that Joseph has been in that pit of a dungeon. 2 years after he had told the cupbearer what his dream meant and not to forget him, 2 years of being forgotten. And we must remember that the story of Joseph is a premonition of what's going to happen to Christ, the only Son of God, that Jesus will be forgotten and abandoned, and that he will go down to the pit, but in a different way, right, for us. Now, the Pharaoh has these two dreams, and they really shake him up, and he brings his magicians and his wise men, and they can't seem to interpret his dreams. We may think, well, it doesn't seem like that hard of a dream to interpret, but we've been given the interpretation from God through the scriptures. It could be too is that the Holy Spirit blocked these pagan wise men from understanding it. Nevertheless, the cupbearer sees the distress of his king, the Pharaoh, and says, it sort of reminds me of a shortcoming of mine, that I'm forgetful and I forgot about the guy. You remember that time that you were upset with me and thought I tried to assassinate you and you threw me in prison? Well, there was a Hebrew slave, and me and the baker, you remember the baker, you put his head on a spike. Well, he interpreted our dreams, and they came out exactly like he said. So Pharaoh calls for Joseph, the slave, and the prisoner to be brought to him, which means that they reached out to Potiphar, the captain of the guard, and said, you need to bring that prisoner to us. And so that he's cleaned up, shaven, and brought to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, I had a dream, no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said that you, when you hear a dream, can interpret it. And here is the key verse that interprets the whole passage. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, I cannot. But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. And so there is the passage that young, arrogant Joseph who said, hey, brothers, here's my dream, and let me tell you what it means. That arrogant Joseph who still said, yeah, God gives interpretations, but tell it me and I'll tell it to you. That was in the prison. That 2 years of languishing further have beat the pride out of him, so that he humbly comes truly as a servant of God and not on his own behalf. And Pharaoh tells him the dream about the 7 fat cows and the 7 scrawny cows that eat them up, and then about the 7 full and good heads of grain, and then the 7 withered and thin heads of grain. And Joseph tells Pharaoh that this dream is one and the same, that this is an indication of 7 years of abundance and 7 years of famine. But he says this in verse 28, that God has given this vision, this dream to Pharaoh in order to bring about God's will, in order to save both Egypt, and we know that this will save Joseph's family. And that as a king, he should set aside, as the Pharaoh should set aside 20% of the 7 good years so that they have food to eat in those 7 lean years. Find someone who's wise and discerning. And the Pharaoh asks, where are we going to find? No one pipes up, no one else answers. And he says, I will confer this onto you, Joseph. Well, hey, thanks, friends. Have a blessed day.